My next example is a historical fiction novel set in the 1920s in Los Angeles with a coming of age arc. The audience is people interested in history, anti-racism, and personal growth. The unique value proposition is that the main character is a Black woman who becomes a doctor and has vivid descriptions and imagery throughout the story. The comfort value proposition is that it's set during the flapper period and it sort of feels like you get to experience that time period. The emotions that I want my reader to feel are anger, sorrow, thrill, suspense, satisfaction, and maybe some hope for the future. So, some ideas for social media content. This one was kind of fun to brainstorm. Images and drawings of clothes from the era, historical photographs or articles about the era, things that you learned as you did research for the project for this fictional novel. It's like a weird phrase because it's like super meta because it's fictional. It's a fictional fiction novel. Anyway, sorry. A picture of you dressed in garb from the era, if you have one. Discussion about the coming of age trope. In fact, I think coming of age could probably yield quite a lot of different types of discussion. You can talk about coming of age tropes in historical settings versus in fantasy or sci-fi settings, what people do or don't like about fantasy or about the coming of age trope in particular. There's lots of discussion fodder in that particular trope. A discussion of the reader's own coming of age stories. What was your tipping point when you finally realized you were an adult, and those sorts of discussions. People might like to share some stories about themselves. A discussion of race in the 1920s versus now. You could have a discussion about the conceptions or misconceptions that people have about the 1920s, about race, about flappers, prohibition, the Depression, those types of things. Maybe quotes from your book that focus on descriptions of the period that sort of give like the general feel of the period or illustrate the challenges that the main character faced. You can post Black Lives Matter or anti-racist educational content as part of your social media. You could create or post content focused on unlearning or becoming a better person. It's tied both into anti-racism work and into the coming of age arc. Unlearning all those things we learned as children. You can maybe post some discussions, philosophical discussions of how understanding the past can help influence the future and the individual decisions that we make as people. You can post discussions about the lies that society taught us during our own coming of age periods. You could maybe host some discussions about the history of medicine and what it looked in the 1920s versus now. You could post some discussions about, what makes you angry or what gives you hope for the future, basically inviting your audience to share their own emotions about the different concepts that you talk about in the book. And then, of course, you can always post articles, either that you wrote or that someone else wrote about history, about the 1920s, about the way that we understand history, about the impact of some of the different themes discussed in your book. And then book covers, book reviews, quotes, and all of that kind of stuff.